Hi everyone, it's Jennifer Sakarian, and today we're going to be making some mixed media cards. Here's your materials list. I'm going to go over it in a little bit more detail so that way we can see what you're going to need to make this happen. To get started, I want to show you some of the mark making supplies, so that can include things like crayons, watercolor, acrylic paint, colored pencils, and gouache. I like to use a variety of markers in addition to watercolor paints, acrylic paint, and of course you're going to be needing some paint brushes, a plate or some wax paper to put your paint on top of. And because we're going to be doing collage, you'll need some kind of found paper. So this can be from magazines, newspapers, scrapbook paper, pretty much anything that you have laying around the house or that might be useful. I've also used old book pages. And for cutting your images out, you'll need some scissors, an X-Acto blade, and also some kind of glue. I'm just using the Elmer's stick glue that works really well, and a ruler can come in handy. In addition, you'll also need some kind of water bucket, an old plastic container of sorts, so that way you can clean your brushes. And of course, because we're doing some cards, we're going to need some envelopes. I have a couple different sizes here and styles, in addition to a nice paper that we're going to be creating our mixed media work on top of. So here I have some fine art papers. Some of them are recycled from old drawings, so this one's from an old painting, but it's perfectly good paper. Preferably watercolor or any type of art paper is going to work the best because it'll be able to hold the materials that you're going to use, and it's going to be able to handle a lot of wear and tear. So these ones are perfect. Any kind of watercolor, printmaking, drawing paper should work pretty good. If not, that's okay too. Your paper just might wrinkle a little bit, so just keep that in mind. In addition, a sketchbook can also come in handy if you want to kind of plan things out and kind of see what it's going to look like, what's your game plan. For me, I like to work pretty intuitively, so I just kind of go at it. Also, like I mentioned, a palette. So this is just a piece of wax paper or palette paper that has some of my brushes. Now onto paper. You can go ahead and decide whether or not you want your card to be a one-sided or if you want it to be folded. So this is more of like a note card sort of style, and it fits in there really nicely. You just want to make sure you measure your piece of paper so that way you have about a 1/4 inch of room all the way around, and it's better to start bigger and then kind of trim it down from there. So I went ahead and measured my envelope, and then I subtracted a 1/4 inch from each side. So you can also decide to fold yours like a traditional card, and when you do that, you just want to make sure you give it a nice firm kind of burnish against the folded edge, and you can use something like a ballpoint pen or a bone folder if you have that, and that way you get a really nice crease. So if you do a folded card, if you do a note card style, either one is great, but just something to keep in mind. So since we're doing a collage piece, you'll want to decide what collage element you want to add, and I'm just going to go ahead and work with this bird that I already had cut out. And I'm going to go ahead and just flip the image around so that way the back side is facing up, and then use a piece of scrap paper to apply my glue. I'm just using the Elmer's. It seems to work really well, and you'll want to go and give it a nice even coat in all directions, not applying too much pressure or force, or it could rip your collage piece. So from there, the glue is nice and sticky. You're going to go ahead and position exactly where you want your collage element to be. And from there, you're just going to apply a little bit of pressure to make sure that it's adhered really nicely and that nothing's kind of lifting up. From here, you could go ahead and set it between a couple books, but I think it should be fine. So the first part I want to get started on is my wet media, and for that, I'm going to go ahead and use some of my watercolors that I already have laid out on my palette. You can also use acrylics at this point, and I would advise against oils just because it's going to take a really long time to dry. So there's many different types of watercolor that you can use. So what I like to do is just have my bucket of water and then go ahead and gradually add some water to my color palette to get a nice little wash. And you'll notice with watercolor and with gouache, it's more transparent, so you want to kind of work it up and build the colors up that way, and I like to start lighter and then build up the color as I go. So here I'm just going to paint kind of like this little branch so that way my bird's not floating in the middle of a white space, and just trying to build that up to a nice color that looks really refreshing and like a really kind of happy natural color. So since these are works of art that are going to get sent out in the mail, I wouldn't spend too much time on them, maybe half-hour tops. So I'm just being really intuitive and kind of experimenting, playing with color, and mixing my media in any way possible, right? So mixed media piece is something that has a lot of information going on, a lot of different types of media, something that's exploratory and a lot of fun. So here I'm just going to go ahead and add some kind of leaves because I'm looking at the fall foliage right now, and it's super beautiful, and I just think that would add a really nice touch to a card that gets sent out. So here I'm just kind of approaching it from more of an abstract angle and just kind of adding this fall foliage, adding a variety of colors, and just kind of seeing what can happen. And I think the orange looks really good. So I'm going to build that up and go ahead and keep adding some more color to it. Now I have some really nice colors added to my piece, so I'm going to go ahead and use one of my favorites, which is this kind of shimmery watercolor, and I'm going to use a really fine point paintbrush, and it's always good to have a nice variety of line quality so that way your work feels really polished and it just looks like it's created really intentionally. So this one again is super shimmery and a lot of fun, and I just want to go ahead and activate some of this negative space or the white of the paper that's happening, and again just sticking to kind of like this abstract style and building it up from there. Now I'm going to go ahead and add some acrylic paint to the image of the bird. This is a matte acrylic, so it will be pretty opaque, and that way I can paint it directly on top of my glossy magazine image of the bird. And if it's too watery, if your media is watercolor, it's probably not going to cover over magazine pages, but it might work for a newspaper. So just experiment and see what's going to work best for you. But I know for a fact, and just because I've done this a lot, that this is going to work really nicely, and that way I'm going to kind of change the image up since I am borrowing somebody else's artwork. So with that being said, with mixed media pieces, that's just something to be considerate of. A lot of times we kind of reappropriate, so just make sure you're using it for educational purposes or family projects and things like that, so that way you don't get in trouble for using somebody else's artwork, and just so we're being respectful of the other artists. So I'm just going to add my own kind of flair to this piece and some of my signature styles, just kind of painting these geometric patterns and things like that on it. So I'm just going to play with that with this really nice seafoam blue and see what happens. Just wanted to show a quick way to kind of erase things. So you'll notice I got a little smudge, and I'm just loading my paintbrush with some water, kind of a lot, and working into the surface. Then I went ahead and just used a paper towel to kind of pick that up. So now it looks really good, and you can't even tell that there was a smudge or an accident there. So that's just with watercolor. Now I'm going to go ahead and move on to the dry media. So this piece is all dry. It looks really cool, so I could probably stop if I wanted to here, but I really want to kind of push the mixed media. So I'm going to use these really cool pens that I have. They're kind of like a gel pen. They're called line painters. And they have a really nice line weight to them. And they're just some really fun and playful colors that I think will work well. I also have a colored pencil, a two-sided pen, and also a highlighter, which is always kind of fun to work with. So let's go ahead and get started with the dry materials. So now I'm going to go ahead and start using one of my paint pens and just kind of creating some more details into this branch piece. So I'm just kind of following the outline of my watercolor area here and just kind of seeing what details I can pull out of the image, and again being playful, being abstract, kind of pushing things to their boundaries. And every once in a while when you're working mixed media, you'll encounter these little errors, like I just spilled a bunch of paint, but I can go ahead and use something like a paintbrush and kind of use that pool of paint to further describe the area. So a lot of times when we're working with new media, we just have to keep that in mind, that it's okay to make mistakes and kind of embrace them, because it's something that we might not have done otherwise. And for me, this happens actually more often than not. So I'm just going to go ahead and go with it and use it to my advantage and make something that's really playful, really unique, and see what I can do with it. So I'm just kind of using this same paint to enhance some of the areas of the bird's plumage or feathers, and I think it's looking really cool. So we're going to go ahead and keep working on this. And since I had this little error, I just wanted to go ahead and try to pick up some of that extra paint by using an old paper towel, and that should be fine. So now I'm going to go ahead and use my next tool, which is your standard colored pencil, and I'm going to try to create some of these funky leaf shapes just to get that idea with a nice line quality that there's some leaves happening and it's not just this kind of abstract notion of leaves. So just kind of creating some details in the paint blotches to kind of make it stand out, make it have a little extra life to it, and I think it's working out quite well. Now I'm going to go ahead and add my highlighter and just kind of create some almost almond shape leaves in the background. You won't be able to see it so much, but it kind of just adds another dimension or level to the piece that's not just the watercolor and the colored pencil, which is really great by itself. Now I'm going to use this purple marker and I'm going to go ahead and kind of create some outline of the original recycled drawing like I mentioned earlier, and just kind of creating this illusion of leaf litter or that the ground has some kind of texture. It doesn't have to be perfect. And now I'm kind of thinking it could use some sort of text. So I'm going to go ahead and write a little happy greeting, hello, in my best handwriting possible, right? You can always practice this if you're unsure. And I'm just going to add a little more details like a heart, and then I'm going to put the word hi just because I think that seems really friendly and kind of silly. So that's going to be kind of my greeting for this card for whoever it gets sent to. So now we're pretty much all set. I have my image on the front and I have my envelope, and I just want to make sure that it's dry before I put it in there. And of course, I'm going to be writing a message before I send this away. And another option, you could always scan it in. If you really love the art piece that you make and you don't want to send it away, you could scan it and then create a printout of it. But I think this looks really beautiful, and I'm super excited to send this out to somebody to kind of lift their spirits. So thank you all so much, and have a good one.